I'm Mark Halperin.
I'm John Heilemann. With all due respect to the Chicago Cubs, welcome to New York. Just make sure you leave your filthy, stinking deep dish pizza back in Chi-Town. It's not really pizza. It's like a cheese pie. It's not really pizza. All right. Happy National Liqueur Day, sports fans. In our lineup tonight, Spending Power and Debbie Downer. But first, the talk of the towner. Hillary Clinton is having the biggest and best week of her campaign after a strong debate performance, and today she is dominating the news again. This afternoon, Jake Tapper asked her to weigh in on President Obama's decision to keep American troops in Afghanistan.
I can't predict where things will be in January of 2017, but I support the president's decision.
Also, in the Hillary Daily Herald, she pulled even with Bernie Sanders in New Hampshire in a Boston Globe poll. She was supportive of a gun buyback program, and she played offense regarding her close advisor, Huma Abedin, testifying to the Benghazi committee. Mark, there has been a lot of back and forth about whether Hillary won or Bernie won the debate. But if you take everything that's happened and put it in the big political tech blender, who wins the week? What happened here?
Hillary Clinton wins the week, but I have to tell you, we like to quote Haley Barbour, who says, nothing in politics is ever as good or bad as it seems. Hillary Clinton was not as weak a week ago as the conventional wisdom had it. She's still an overwhelming favorite to be the Democratic nominee. The debate performance helped her a lot. Her campaign now has got a spring in its step. Yeah. They're on offense on Benghazi. They're on offense on a range of things. I think Bernie Sanders, however, despite that one New Hampshire poll, is still a mortal threat to her in Iowa, New Hampshire. That hasn't changed. She's still strong. He still threats.
I offer you a retort, Haley Barbour-esque retort. That good gets better and bad gets worse. And good is getting better for Hillary Clinton right now. She has had a horrible year. But the momentum, that's the key thing, right? The spring in the step. You know, she does, I mean, again, a lot still hangs on this Benghazi hearing. A lot of us now are sort of assuming that she's going to do well because the committee itself is in trouble. That could still go badly for her, I acknowledge. But if she has a good week next week, she's going to be on track. Not to a guaranteed nomination or a coronation, but she's going to be on track in a way she hasn't been all year.
They don't have to spend time in the campaign now trying to get donors calmed down. That means Robbie Mook and John Podesta and everyone else can do other stuff.
Like focus on winning.
Focus on winning. Sanders is still a threat, though. She's not solved the puzzle of those two states.
But interestingly now, as the data is starting to come in, something that looks a little bit more like real data, not those online polls on the night of the debate, it's looking like Hillary Clinton's getting a little bounce out of that debate, and Bernie's not getting much.
We'll see what the other polls show. All right, let's talk about John's big piece that he wrote today on BloombergPolitics.com about the woman who's known as DWS. There's turmoil inside the Democratic National Committee still, as some officials there are speaking out against their leader. And this time, to John, they're not all on background. Some DNC vice chairs say on the record that chairperson Debbie Wasserman Schultz isn't being honest about the process she led that led to only 6 total Democratic debates. And they're saying maybe, just maybe, it's time for a new chair. So, John, will this fallout lead to the following fallout? Either more debates or the ouster of Debbie Wasserman Schultz as chair?
I do not think in either case it will. I think the answer to both of those things is no. R.T. Ryback, the former mayor of Minneapolis, called yesterday and reamed Debbie Wasserman Schultz out to me and suggested that he might be ready to call for her resignation because he watched her, in his view, lying about another vice chair, Tulsi Gabbard, on television when we were all in Las Vegas. The problem is that among Democratic voters, there's not an outcry for more debates. And without that, it's not likely to happen. The only people who can force her hand would be President Obama, Hillary Clinton, neither of them likely to do that. And ultimately, the only person who can get her out of that job is President Obama, and he just doesn't care about the DNC.
It probably doesn't matter. I think the way it's going to matter really to a wider audience and not just a DNC inside thing is Hillary Clinton, if she's going to get elected president, or whoever the Democrats nominate, needs a strong DNC for fundraising and for coordination. And there are people who have doubts about Debbie Wasserman Schultz focus on those things. Whether she steamrolled people on debates, whether she's not telling the truth, that's not going to matter.
But this is the deeper thing. The thing is, this thing has provoked people to come out and say what a lot of people have been saying for a long time, that she's a weak chair. Yeah, exactly. And whether she goes or stays, if she stays as a weak chair, that's bad for the Democrats heading into 2016. Yeah. Okay. With the third quarter fundraising numbers now all in, there are lots and lots of spreadsheets and dollar signs to sort through. among the 21 presidential campaigns. But 3 candidates in particular are subject to more scrutiny and criticism than the others. Those 3 would be Hillary Clinton, Jeb Bush, and Marco Rubio. They each have achievements to crow about in their numbers, but they are also vulnerable to some criticism. On Clinton, the RNC happily notes that, quote, just 17% of Clinton's haul was from donors giving less than $200, compared to 75% for Bernie Sanders, that there's some spending that they suggested was excessive, and that her burn rate was 86%. On Jeb Bush, in the second quarter, he raked in $760,000 a day. But in Q3, his raising rate has plummeted to $150,000 a day. His burn rate is as high as Clinton's, and the campaign is slashing salaries to save dough. Finally, on Marco Rubio, he raised just $5.7 million, the equivalent of just 71 luxury fishing boats, luxury defined the way Marco Rubio defines them, far fewer fishing boats than he raised in the previous quarter. Although his campaign argues that fundraising has picked up online after a slow summer, still doesn't look that great. So, Mark, in this thicket of data, what interests you most?
Jeb Bush now is not a shock and awe, blow everybody away candidate with fundraising. He's towards the top of the pack, but he raised less than Ben Carson. And if you'd said at the beginning of the year that Jeb Bush would have a quarter where he raised substantially less than Ben Carson, that'd be a problem. And I think for Hillary Clinton, to be a strong fundraising candidate in this era, you got to be not just a strong bundler and big donation candidate, but you got to do better on the internet. She's still not doing very well with small donors.
I mean, that burn rate for Jeb Bush is scary. 86% burn rate. You're spending money like a front runner. He's not the front runner, not close to the front runner. And you're spending all that money. 13.2 would be a respectable number if you weren't spending it all. And he's spending it, and his poll numbers are going down. They are, again, we yesterday said it looked like a pretty good number for him. As you dig deeper into the details on Jeb, that number does not look nearly as good as it did yesterday.
The other crazy thing is you got Clinton campaign and Bush super PAC spending big on TV. They spend all this time raising money, all this coverage of the money. If they're spending the bulk of the money on ads and the ads aren't actually helping them improve their poll standing, something messed up about that.
But let's not forget Marco Rubio. I mean, it's all interesting, right? I mean, Rubio, you know, we've been talking about this. Supposedly playing the hot hand. Everyone's talking about Marco Rubio. Maybe he's the front runner. He's the establishment guy who could knock off Trump. You know, he's spent $5.7 million. Somehow they rounded that up to $6 million. It did not look impressive to me.
No.
They had a bad Q3, dollar-wise.
It's almost inexplicable how little they raised. All right, coming up, a classic WADR twofer. Our colleagues and friends Jennifer Jacobs of the Des Moines Register and James Pindell, who just interviewed Hillary Clinton, writes for the Boston Globe, after this word from our sponsors. Our guest tonight is two guests tonight. Jennifer Jacobs of the Des Moines Register, joining us from Des Moines. And James Pindell of the Boston Globe joins us from Boston. James, just out of your interview with Hillary Clinton, which you're going to write up and everybody can read on the website, but tell us bullet points, some highlights for what she said to you.
You know, after weeks of her trying to show distance between herself and President Obama, she really embraced him in this interview. She backed his policy in Afghanistan. She gives him a letter grade of an A for his administration, says he doesn't get enough credit. And then a number of issues down the line, she is really much aligning herself with the president. Of course, she's very happy with our new poll numbers that came out showing her now tied with Bernie Sanders for the first time in months. But, you know, down the line, I asked her also about, does she believe she's in the Elizabeth Warren wing of the Democratic Party? She kind of doesn't reject them. She kind of rejects the premise and repeats what she said in the debate, that she's a progressive who can get things done.
JJ, I have to ask you about Iowa. A week from today, we're going to be 100 days out from the Iowa caucuses. 100 days out. How do things stand out there at this point in time?
Yeah, October 24th is 100 days out. It's like I think it's a big reset button. That's the real starting line. That's when we're going to really start seeing the campaigns mobilize staff. Already the couches are starting to fill up, the spare bedrooms in activist homes. You're starting to see more candidate activity, more appearances in the state. Everything is starting to ramp up. So it's getting fascinating. Probably the biggest reality check is how much can change in those last 100 days. If you you look back and see how much changed in the last 100 days, 100 days ago was July 16th, and how much has changed in the race has been amazing. So that's probably the biggest take-home 100 days out is everything could change in these last 100 days.
James, overview, 30,000 feet in New Hampshire. At this point, who do you think can win the primary? Who's the universe on the Republican side of people who can win the primary?
Yeah, a bunch. Right now, we're still trying to figure out who is going to be that outsider candidate, who's going to be the insider candidate. You know, Jeb Bush is obviously beginning to staff up, put offices, beginning to have a lot more campaign advertising. I don't think we're going to say John Kasich. I know you were in New Hampshire with him recently. I don't think we're seeing that campaign right now, though they're putting more money in. But as Jennifer said, this is the more maturing part of the phase of the campaign. We're seeing more staff, clearly nothing like Iowa, much more ads. I think there are 8 candidates in the state today. So this campaign is beginning to go into a new phase, and there's just so many people right now. You can make a plausible argument on who can win the primary.
James, I'm going to stick with you and ask you about the Democratic side of New Hampshire. You mentioned the poll that seems to have shown Hillary with a little bit of a bounce. At this moment, who is the New Hampshire frontrunner?
Look, I still believe if you think that the invisible primary is basically on 3 elements, on polling, on money, and on endorsements, or kind of the organization you have together, you still have to give the edge to Hillary Clinton. Her organization on the ground is superior. By numbers and by offices, Bernie Sanders is getting close to parity. But in terms of expertise, you have to give it to Clinton. And given the fact that she pulled it off so stunningly in 2008 in New Hampshire, you definitely have to give her the edge. But clearly, I'm not just repeating what you've heard before, and what you know on the ground, Bernie Sanders is the one with the energy and with the momentum. But this debate was really good for her in terms of buzz on the ground in the state.
Jennifer, we've all been waiting in the journalistic community and in Republican politics for Ted Cruz to catch fire in New Hampshire, in Iowa, as we head towards this new phase. Is that happening now, or is he poised to become one of the leaders as opposed to kind of in the middle of the pack where he's been?
Not happening yet, poised for sure. If you talk to strategists here, people who know Iowa really well, those Republican strategists will say that they think that Ted Cruz is going to be the one who wins the Iowa caucuses. They predict that those conservative caucus goers are going to hit the panic button right near the last minute and say, we want somebody who knows how D.C. works, how it runs. They want somebody who is going to shake things up, obviously, but they want somebody who's not going to be floundering around with a long learning curve. He fits the profile for Iowa conservatives so perfectly. So he might not be winning his lane right now, but he's got a really solid organization here. He's making a presence. He's already got 22 events scheduled for October alone. That's a lot. He's making his push right now. He's making his move.
I'm hearing what you're hearing. A lot of the other campaigns are seeing in their own research that Cruz is poised now.
So James, let's carry over from that same question and shift to you. If Ted Cruz somehow were to sneak up, a lot of people now think it's possible that Cruz could somehow figure out a way to win that Iowa caucus. If he does that and shows up in New Hampshire, is the New Hampshire electorate, Republican electorate, would it be at all hospitable to a Ted Cruz type candidacy? Or Ted Cruz's candidacy?
I think what's good for him.
Yeah, go ahead.
Right. I think what's good for him is that will give definition to the conservative cause. I think he's on the precipice here among being that conservative candidate, particularly if he comes out of Iowa. I think he would do quite well. Is he going to get first? No, he's not. Is he going to get third? Is he going to get second? Very much possibly. I mean, right now we're in a moment in New Hampshire where, yes, we have, depending on your poll, Donald Trump is still in first place. Then the most recent poll from NBC has Carly Fiorina in second, or sometimes it's Ben Carson. But what's fascinating to me on the ground, what people are constantly talking about is, who is that establishment candidate going to be? Who's the candidate who's really going to win the New Hampshire primary? And you've got Jeb Bush, you've got Marco Rubio, you've got John Kasich, you've got Chris Christie. That's where the game's at right now. And, you know, that person probably will win the New Hampshire primary. But Ted Cruz certainly has enough on the ground right now, particularly among conservatives, that he could easily be that choice.
Jennifer, we're seeing nationally the sniping between Bush and Rubio, the candidates themselves, their senior staff, even Jeb Bush Jr. You're seeing that conflict play out. On the ground in Iowa, among staff or activists, is that Bush-Rubio conflict manifesting itself?
Yes, that's the big power struggle in the establishment lane right now. Rubio's getting a good look. He really is. He's having a moment. The question is can he capitalize on that? You know as well as I do that organization is what matters in Iowa. Organization is what's tried, true, and tested. And 100 days ago, Marco Rubio didn't have very much of an organization in Iowa at all. Now, he has brought in staffers. He's beginning to get active here. But then you've got Jeb Bush, who has a very strong organization. And I would say that of the mainstream candidates, he has by far the strongest organization in Iowa. He's got, the endorsements. He's got, people working really hard for him on the ground. So it's when you ask the establishment Republicans here, who are your top 2 or 3, they almost always say Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio. But it's who can capitalize on it for those caucuses.
Yeah. All right, Jennifer Jacobs from our friends and partners at the Des Moines Register. Thank you, Jennifer. And James Pindell, looking forward to reading your full Hillary Clinton interview right up on the Boston Globe website. Thank you both. Have a great weekend. We'll be right back with someone who knows Madam Secretary pretty well right after this word from our sponsors.
And now, Madam Secretary, although not the one in real life. Recently, the actress Jill Hennessy became a recurring character, an intelligence operative, on the CBS show that plays off Hillary Clinton's time as Secretary of State. If you don't know Hennessy from that role, you might know her from Law & Order or Crossing Jordan, or from her music. Because even as she debuted on Madam Secretary, she released her second album, I Do, on which she sounds kind of like a cross between Bonnie Raitt, Lucinda Williams, and Alison Krauss. I sat down with Hennessy the other day to talk about her very busy week.
You couldn't have asked for better timing, and it was a great time for us to release, especially with Madam Secretary premiering like the same week.
Yeah.
So it gave us a nice little sort of springboard for the PR and stuff. And Madam Secretary is just a great show to be doing.
Yeah.
Man. I mean, working in New York City.
Right, that's the thing. You're shooting that show still, right? Because you're a recurring character on the show. You're going to be all through this season. And you guys actually shoot that show here.
Exactly.
Even though it is a ostensibly Washington-based, D.C.-based show.
Exactly.
You in fact shoot it in New York City, which is very convenient for someone who has an obstreperous husband and two and two lovely children.
Yes, if you want to, if I want to see my kids, it's good to work in New York. And through the magic of TV, we're in Washington.
Right. You had 2 big TV parts that kind of define you in a lot of people's minds now. When they see your picture, someone who sees you on the street, they think about Law & Order, and they think about Crossing Jordan, right? Neither one of them, I mean, Crossing Jordan you were in longer than you were in Law & Order.
That was about 6 years.
Right, and Law & Order was like 3, right?
Yeah.
But I assume that people come up to you because especially Law & Order is such a kind of iconic show, and also an iconic New York show. I assume people come up to you on the street all the time and are like, oh, you're the Law & Order lady.
Usually it's,
right?
it's Law & Order, plus it's in syndication. That was like one
that's
of the
that's part of why it's iconic, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So people, watching TV in the mornings, and then they'll see me in the afternoon and think I'm still on the show.
I had no idea that at one point you played Jackie Kennedy. What was that like? How did you prepare for, I mean, in terms of acting challenges, playing such a, again, I'll use the word iconic figure. How do you prepare for that role, and what was it like to play her?
It was terrifying. I was actually very apprehensive about even taking the part. Because she is somebody who I admire greatly, and you don't want to mess that up, especially since you want to really maintain the respect and dignity of that human being who is very much a real human being, especially to her family, who are ever present.
Let's talk about Madam Secretary. You are a political person.
Yes.
And I think one of the ways we got to know each other was that you're a big consumer of political news. You watch a lot of political cable and have strong political views.
Guilty as charged.
Right. So what was there? You've not done, apart from the Jackie Kennedy thing, you've not done a lot of political work in the past.
No, not really. That's why Madam Secretary I was kind of looking forward to see how they deal with these stories. Are they going to go rip from the headlines, a little less?
Right. So talk about your character in the show, and talk about how you got into it and what it's been like so far working on that program.
I play a character named Jane Fellows who works with the Defense Intelligence Agency.
Right.
And a very hawkish kind of character. It's very interesting to play somebody from like a very different perspective, which is actually incredibly fun.
Right.
But she, definitely by any means necessary, sacrificed the few for the many.
Right.
And has probably suffered the loss of so many people close to her working in the field as a former desk analyst, that she, everything's just, by the book, it doesn't personalize anything. She does her job.
Having you learn about all of those things, about the kind of woman that this character would be. I sort of joked about your politics. You are liberal.
I'm pretty liberal.
Pretty liberal,
yes.
Right? Right. So your politics are not nearly as hawkish, presumably, as the character's politics. So how do you reconcile that and work through it and deal with the conflict?
You look at cause and effect, and like I was saying, with looking at what somebody's life experience is, with seeing what the potential outcome can be if I screw up at once, you know, in my job, and we could have a terrorist attack in our city because I forgot to dot an I. Right. If you look at it from that point of view, what if I were in these shoes, and what's the possible outcome? In that way, I can kind of get it. And one thing I always love, too, in politics is I don't have to always agree with somebody's point of view to have the utmost respect for them. Because I don't know everything. I'm always learning, and that's why I love listening to everybody, to have varying and differing points of view. Yeah.
Have you personally, Jill Hennessy, made a choice about a candidate to support in this race?
Not quite. Well, you know, there are some people I really like. Yeah. There are aspects of them that I really like.
Right. Who would those be? Who would those be?
Well, are you talking about one side or the other?
Well, I'm sorry, how do you feel about Secretary Clinton?
I've always had the most profound respect for her.
Right. You're now working on Madam Secretary, right?
You know, I just think she is accomplished more than most people accomplish in about 5 lifetimes. Right. But I love a lot of what Bernie Sanders is saying too, man. Right. I find him really inspiring. Right. I think he's tremendous, and we need a jolt of that. You know, I think he's actually really laying some really nice groundwork right now. I think
Canadians don't have as big a problem with socialism as some Americans do.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. It's interesting the connotations that the word socialism have down here. I was like, wow, that's interesting.
Right. Okay, so the TV show is fantastic. You're off and running with that. People can watch and see you on Madam Secretary being a hard-assed spook, basically.
Yes.
Now you got this record, right?
Yes, got this record.
So 6 years since the last one. What makes you decide, I want to go off and do this very hard, time-consuming thing, launch a second album, and take it out and put it out in the world?
I really feel like I can't not do the music writing and releasing albums. Just the fact that I made the first album, I never thought I could make an album. Right. I mean, who am I? And I sat there, I wrote these songs. My husband said, yeah, you really should do this. You should pursue this. Don't give up on this. And I've always had this sort of mentality of, you know what, life is short. Right. Throw it against the wall, see if it sticks. Well, I was hoping to be walk the razor's edge for years, dressed in black and self-devotion of my feet. I hope I'm making records, you know, till I physically can't anymore.
Our thanks to Jill Hennessy and Gabe Stolman and all of his team at Fedora, where we shot that interview. We will be right back. As James Carville would say,
what's going on?
It's great to have him back. We're live 24/7 on BloombergPolitics.com. We're on the tube twice a day at 5 and at 8.
See you Monday. Big political week. Until then, for both of us, we say sayonara.